Emperor Palpatine is one of the most iconic characters in the Star Wars franchise. Whether you like the prequels or not, I feel like it's safe to say that his role within it and Ian McDiarmid's performance was one of the highlights of the trilogy. But as you might already know, George Lucas's writing and directing throughout the prequel trilogy has been heavily criticized. Fans thought the dialogue was horrible, that the acting left a lot on the table, and that the overuse of CGI made this trilogy unwatchable. But as someone who grew up watching the prequels, I'm going to defend Lucas on what I think is his greatest strength: his ability to tell and plan a story. Now this might sound crazy, and I can almost already hear people furiously typing on their keyboards, but just give me a chance to explain myself here. Because I think that Palpatine's plan to take over the galaxy is actually brilliant to levels you hadn't even realized. I believe that his story arc in the prequels is one of the greatest things George Lucas has ever written. And if you think this is an exaggeration, well, maybe you're right. But there are layers to his plan that I would bet you hadn't even thought about. There's one example that immediately comes to mind that showcases how good his plan is, something that relates to one of the most memed-on scenes in the prequels, but to me, it highlights how secretly brilliant his plan is, so you might want to stick around for that one. From the long-term vision he already had in The Phantom Menace, to him enacting the final part of his plan with Order 66, we're going to analyze how Palpatine's plan in the prequel trilogy is simply brilliant. So let's get into it. But first, I'm going to give you some context on the prequels, and more specifically, Palpatine's role within them. As we all know, Palpatine is the evil emperor from the original trilogy, but he doesn't have that big of a role in those movies. He's more of a mysterious character up until the very end. So when the prequels were released, it's safe to say that fans wanted to see more from the Emperor and his origin story. Funnily enough, after looking online for a bit, I saw that some fans didn't even realize that the Emperor and Palpatine were the same character before the release of the prequels, which is crazy to me considering it's the same actor reprising his role, but that's besides the point. Anyways, we got to see a young Senator Palpatine climbing his way, already orchestrating behind the scenes in The Phantom Menace. In Attack of the Clones, we see him starting to get closer to Anakin, pushing the conflict between the Republic and the Separatists and gaining full power over the galaxy. And finally, in Revenge of the Sith, we see him enact the final part of his plan: get rid of the Jedi and become the Emperor. This is just a quick summary, but like I said, there are layers to his plan, layers that make it brilliant to me. I've really grown to appreciate the prequels even more. I was already a big fan of them since, as I just mentioned, I grew up with them. But one of the reasons why I enjoyed them even more is because of Palpatine. As a chess player, I find it really interesting how you can see him manipulate people in the Senate on both sides. You just see him slowly make his moves, using people as pawns, and when his enemy ends up overextending, he just goes in for the kill. Just so you're aware, I might make a few more chess analogies throughout this video, so bear with me here, and let's get into the reasons why Palpatine's plan is secretly brilliant. So when you think about Palpatine's plan, one of the first thoughts you have is probably the Clone Army and Order 66. Or maybe you think about him turning Anakin to the dark side, right? And to be fair, that's a good start since those are among the most memorable moments in the trilogy. But Order 66 and Anakin's turn are just the final pieces really. Everything starts from the Phantom Menace and the blockade on Naboo. Yes, I know, politics, right? We don't like that. I'm aware of it. This is probably a hot take, but I think that not only is the politics in the prequels a good part of the trilogy, like I said, I loved seeing Palpatine's plan come together, right? But it's also a necessary, pivotal part of the story. Without it, you wouldn't have the understanding of how the Republic and the Jedi Order fell, in my opinion. Anyways, the blockade on Naboo, right? I'll try to make it as simple as possible. The blockade happens because the Trade Federation, these guys right here, gets taxed on trade routes. But they don't want to pay those taxes, obviously. So Darth Sidious orders them to put a blockade on Naboo as a protest and keep it until the Senate decides to remove those taxes. Now you might be wondering why Naboo? Well, it's because the man that championed this law is none other than the Senator of Naboo, good old Chief Palpatine, who, from the very beginning, as you can see, is playing on both sides of the board. And he just made his first move by using the Separatists as pawn from the get-go. And in doing so, he creates a galactic crisis. He manufactures a conflict on his home planet, and he then uses his relationship with Padme to expose Chancellor Valorum. This is also why the blockade being on Naboo is crucial, because it gives Palpatine political power down the line. He is presented as a savior and arguably becomes the reason why he gets elected as Supreme Chancellor of the Republic, which is basically Palpatine's goal during the Phantom Menace, right? He needed to be at the top of the political mountain to further execute his plan. One other thing he needed was an army, on both sides actually. He needed a threat that the Republic would be obligated to reply to. Hence why he used the droid army of various entities like the Trade Federation's droid army in the Phantom Menace. In doing so, it showed the Republic how it was defenseless against growing threats in the galaxy and planted seeds for a war coming. A war that would end up giving him full control over the Senate. So 10 years later, Palpatine is still the Chancellor of the Republic, and at this point you might be wondering how he stayed Chancellor for that long. Well, originally he was supposed to do 2 4-year terms, but he used the separatist movement and threats to convince the Senate that he was a necessary stabilizing force. Again, this is why him orchestrating the blockade and resolving the situation is so important, because it definitely contributed to the Senate giving him full confidence on this issue. During Attack of the Clones is also when Palpatine starts building his relationship with Anakin. I'm pretty sure they only have one scene where they interact with each other, but it's a very important one. Palpatine just inflates his ego the whole time, telling him that he will be the best Jedi of all time, literally just gassing him up, and at the same time already putting the idea in his head that the Jedi don't deserve him. But more importantly, planting the seeds for when he is going to need him the most. Lastly, one key aspect of Episode 2 is also, obviously, the Clone Army. Now, he didn't commission it, it was more of a fortunate event that some Jedi Master did, but Palpatine did take as apprentice someone who used to be a member of the Order, Count Dooku. Dooku used Sifo Dyas, the Jedi who ordered the army, and had him killed to take over the project and start assembling the final pieces of his master's plan. Using Dooku is also a big part of the brilliancy of Palpatine. First, Dooku had access to the Jedi archives, which allowed him to delete Kamino from said archives and run the projects in secrecy. But Dooku was also someone who had grown disillusioned with the Jedi. Someone who fully lost faith in the Order and thought that they had become enforcers of the Republic. But turning Dooku was never going to be an easy task, and one of the only things Dooku probably still cared about was his apprentice, Qui-Gon Jinn. Which is why Maul's role was also crucial. I don't think Palpatine ever cared about Maul or had any further plans for him. I think, like many other characters, which funnily enough includes Dooku, he used him as a pawn. And the whole time, he wanted someone more powerful, wiser, someone who also had more political power, like Dooku. So Palpatine used his pain and suffering from when Qui-Gon died, along with the fact that he had lost faith in the Jedi, to fully turn him to the dark side. Again, I really want to accentuate the fact that every move Palpatine makes is calculated, measured. Way more than you would think of on the first watch of the prequels. But after all this planning, manipulations, and with the Clone Wars starting, it was finally time for Darth Sidious to reveal himself to the world and unleash the final part of his plan. Revenge of the Sith pays off on Palpatine's plan in the best way possible. The Clone Wars is in full effect, the Jedi are fighting for peace all over the galaxy, Darth Sidious is getting closer to reveal himself and end the Jedi once and for all. He is getting closer to Anakin as well, to a point where the Jedi actually used this to spy on him, which he's aware of course. But this leads to Palpatine finally revealing himself to Anakin. He makes a bold move in doing so, and an even bolder one when he uses Padme and Anakin's fear of losing her to convince him to join the dark side. Which doesn't work instantly because Anakin just goes snitching to the man who hates him the most, and Windu goes to confront Palpatine and arrest him. But remember earlier when I said I had a great example to showcase how brilliant his plan is? Well, this is it. Everybody knows this scene, where Windu and 3 other Jedi go to arrest Palpatine, right? And as I said before, it's one of the most memed on scene because, as you might remember, the 3 other Jedi die very quickly. People called them horrible and wondered why Windu had picked those 3 goons to face a Sith Lord. And I think it's explained in Legends that Palpatine used the scream that stunned the 3 other Jedi but not Windu because Windu knows the dark side and he can't fall into that trap and blah blah blah. But I don't really like this explanation. In fact, I have a different interpretation that I think is much better. Because Palpatine's goal was to orchestrate the Clone Wars to create a conflict within the galaxy and gain political power, right? But what if there was a different reason? What if he also used the Clone Wars to spread out the Jedi throughout the galaxy? Wouldn't that make sense? There are thousands of Jedi in the Order. Palpatine can't beat them all. So he must find a way to isolate them. Maybe Windu wanted stronger Jedi, maybe he wanted more Jedi to go with him. But what if those 3 Jedi were the only ones he could find in that moment? Yoda is off planet, Obi-Wan is fighting Grievous, and Windu doesn't trust Anakin, and Palpatine knows all that. So he takes the best moment to reveal himself to Anakin, forcing him to send the order to arrest him. He just picked a timing where he knew he had the best chances of winning. This is why Palpatine's plan is brilliant to me. He literally divided to conquer. This is exactly what Order 66 is in the end. Every Jedi ended up on the battlefield in charge of a battalion that they could not defend themselves against. And although he loses the fight against Windu fair and square, I think he also knew that Anakin would be too tempted to at least show up. This is also one of the reasons Palpatine's plan is amazing. He had multiple levels of security. He literally is showcasing throughout the trilogy how smart he is. He makes his moves slowly. Meanwhile, his enemy gets aggressive from the beginning, ignoring the threat that's about to come. Palpatine sacrifices piece after piece after piece, and when his enemy thinks he has the win, he unleashes a devastating attack and takes the victory. This man is literally playing chess while everybody else is playing checkers. And the cherry on top of the cake, he is celebrated as a hero and a martyr. He gets to tell the story of how the evil Jedi tried to murder him and how he survived and saved the galaxy from them. Simply brilliant. Whether you love or hate the prequels, you cannot deny that Palpatine's character arc overall is one of the greatest things George Lucas has ever written. And yes, again, I am biased. I love the prequels, like I said before, I grew up with them. But I really want to praise Lucas's ability to create an overarching story that makes sense and that has layers to it. I talked about this in my sequels video that I highly recommend you give a watch, but it was one of the main reasons why to me the sequel trilogy failed. They had no plans for it, and even worse, J.J. Abrams and Rian Johnson kept erasing each other's story. That's why I think Palpatine's plan is brilliant as well. Not only it shows how smart and how much of a master manipulator he is through the whole trilogy, contrary to the sequels where he just feels like a generic villain, but it's also showcasing Lucas's ability to make a plan and stick to it. And again, people love to criticize his ability to write dialogue, and it's hard to argue against it sometimes. But I think all the above showcases how good of a writer he can be. Make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you like Star Wars content, and comment what you liked, didn't like, and what you would have changed about Palpatine's story in the prequels. But that's it for me. Let me know what you think, and see you in the next one.